Hello, my name is Professor Elliot Sloan. I'm based in Florida in the United States, and I have the pleasure of introducing our next Global Clinical Engineering Alliance webinar on clinical engineering and health technology management. The presenter, Tom Judd, is a longtime friend and colleague, and he is also known worldwide for his enthusiastic and very competent organization of webinars, collegial activities, congresses, conferences, and also mentorship for so many. This particular presentation is fascinating, and I think it's one that you'll want to obtain a recording for your own use and perhaps even use some of the slides in your own dialogue with your colleagues in ministries of health. In this presentation, Tom goes through a history of 30 years, which is actually only a part of the 50 or 60 years of work that has been done with clinical engineers and health technology management. The presentation is not just a review of history, however. It focuses on the near-term, immediate, and future health technology management activities and requirements that are facing us for dealing with interoperable medical technologies, software as medical devices, and artificial intelligence and its many applications in patient care. Again, I invite all of you to pay attention, and I think you'll find so much information that you'll want to have your own copies of this material for future discussions. Tom, now over to you.
Hey, clinical engineering friends, biomedical engineers around the world that serve at the point of care. So glad to be with you today and talking about an interesting, a little bit complex topic, clinical engineering, health technology management indicators. But what's the reality today? And why indicators? Well, you can't manage what you do not measure. I think we've all heard that. It's attributed to USA management expert Peter Drucker, but it's really been popularized in the CE community in my country and around the world with a colleague, Bob Morris, who pictured here to the right. And we actually have a Bob Morris Humanitarian Award for the great work he did. So where are the ventilators? Where's the oxygen equipment? You know, this was the WHO, the World Health Organization's World Health Assembly's cry, one of the top 3 issues there in 2020 and May of 2021. Of course, you know, this is the group of ministers of health from around WHO's 194 member states that gather every year. And as a result of asking those questions, WHO expanded the scope of our profession to include lifecycle management, not only of traditional medical devices, but personal protective equipment, oxygen sources and delivery devices, and digital health tools during the pandemic. And that still is going on. And I could say more about my own journey, and I did actually last August with the KISA group, the Clinical Engineering Society there in South Africa. So you could find out more of what I said there. But the essence of it is I had a 4-year plan when I went to my first hospital clinical engineering department to manage. And, you know, indicators was a big part of that. So there's so many perspectives, and I'll define that today. But really, what are we clinical engineers about? Why do we measure stuff that we're managing so we can manage it better? And the answer is to get a positive impact on clinical outcomes. So briefly, what I'm going to talk about here in the next few minutes is 30 years or more of CE-HTM indicators history. It's certainly grounded through our profession's partnership with WHO. It's gained wider healthcare system views and impacts from quality and safety and various benchmarks. And we've built a lot into our profession and how we define ourselves through our capacity building framework that we've developed in recent years. But when we look at other perspectives, we've got to think of asset management, nomenclature, digital health. And I've got 3 case studies, and I'll close with a call to action that includes how we incorporate AI, Internet of Things, and more. So this is a busy page, but I want you to look at the bottom right. When I started this story of history, and this was a WHO meeting in Sao Paulo in 1989, several of us got to be there, and the group was wrestling with equipment maintenance requirements across healthcare technical services. And a group of Americans, including myself, Dr. Yadin David, Frank Painter, and Bob Morris, that I mentioned earlier, were able to be a part of that. And we spoke about indicators. But then I'll fast forward at some point to a WHO project with our friends from Europe, where we started to widen the view of indicators about implementation of health technology management at various levels, nationally, centrally, locally, the quality of HTM results, the impact on not only financial, but also on quality and safety. Now, our Global Clinical Engineering Journal, published through Global Clinical Engineering Alliance with help from IFMBE CED, one of the top seen articles over the years, the 7 years since it began in 2018, is this Making a Difference. Global Health Technology Success Stories, 400 submissions from 125 countries. And what that focused on about indicators was how do we improve innovation, access, health systems, safety and quality, HTM, and digital health. And we, Antonio Hernandez and I, incorporated that into the latest version in 2019 of the Global Clinical Engineering Handbook in the indicators chapter. IFMBE CED in 2020 with Luis Fernandez and Jennifer DiFrancesco had a webinar. And by the way, all of these links are active. And when you get this presentation afterwards from the GCEA website, you'll be able to drill down to all of these places. And so in 2020, Luis and Jennifer talked about hospital and department profiles, widening the scope of what indicators are about, how it impacts safety, program and financial performance, program maturity. That's the program of the hospital and the clinical engineering department in the hospital. And then interoperability and cybersecurity and inventory management. We know a lot of this work, of course, is embodied in CMMSs, computerized medical maintenance systems, that WHO and others have written extensively about. So then we developed that framework I'll show in a moment together, key indicators across countries. Last year, GCEA with AAMI published the benchmarking guides, over 100 indicators that have grown around the world, and that was translated so far into 9 languages for all of you to get access to. And then more recently, I might even say a troubling reference, 2025, the Inter-American Development Bank measures of hospital efficiency and quality. I mean, this is the kind of thing we deal with in your countries and in your regions of the world, and this was for Latin America and Caribbean specifically. But what this measure of how to improve what hospitals do, both in business side and clinical side, is that it really didn't talk about medical devices. So, we're missing some connections, but, we can work on that together. So moving on here, many of you have seen this before, the clinical engineering, biomedical engineering, it's serving at the point of care capacity building framework. And so GCEA and CED in recent years have worked hard on this to look at these buckets of how do you grow, how do you measure where you are, how do you grow from that and your ability to manage the health technology resources in a health setting. And certainly it comes from knowledge, it comes from investment, it comes from competencies, and you may be in an LMIC where the low development for that so far, but you're moving towards middle. And then what does that look like in the first world? And I won't belabor that, but you get my point. And, this speaks on the left-hand side of the framework, what clinical engineers do. And we've already talked about that. We ensure appropriateness of health technology on the front end and their deployment, and then sustainability after they're in use. And we're measuring safety and quality and outcomes. And by the way, this approach very much fits asset management. Several clinical engineers of note talk about, our asset management of medical devices fits into a wider view of asset management in a healthcare situation. We'll talk about that a bit more. And of course, our profession has worked very closely with WHO in a variety of ways that I mentioned on the right here. But so here is that asset management approach, and this is the national, Global Society of Asset Management, and it looks like our CMMS and our management systems in clinical engineering, particularly when that picture in the middle, the graphic in the middle of we got the right people and we manage through the life cycle, and then we review for quality and risk and so forth. And, we get influenced by the hospital and the legislation and so forth that we serve. And really the definitions of asset management of all those boxes are on the right and left for you to look at with that link. But we fit into an asset management context, right? But right now I'm going to drill down on those, show it one more time, this march through history of what the indicators have, how their perspectives have built on one another. So here, for example, in the upper left is, a small piece, and you can go to the link that I provided for this 1989 WHO study. But, one piece of 100 pages there was, or about 20 pages were all the known medical device types and what were their corrective and preventive maintenance hours. And I kind of captured here the picture of various types of infusion pumps, and I'm going to stay with the infusion pump example as I continue. Then you fast forward 20 years, and WHO, some of the same people that had worked on that said, well, what's a wider view? It's not just fixing stuff, even though that's important, but it's fixing stuff and managing stuff in the context of improving quality of care. And so, wait time and downtime and fatal events because of lack of equipment and, infection rates, all these kind of quality things related to the use of medical devices started to get into our vocabulary and our focus. And then on this slide, the rest of the slide in the middle and the right talks about those success stories I mentioned. And that was looking again at indicators in the context of innovation, access, many stories here to further define that. From a health system point of view across the country, in context of safety and quality, HTM and quality technology, we certainly mean digital health, and from the journal. And on the right-hand side is just one snapshot of one page from that story where it says, how have we improved HTM in various countries? About a third down the page, HTM in Kosovo, in Kyrgyzstan, in Laos, in Lebanon, in Mexico, in Paraguay, and so on. So now we were starting to use indicators to manage how we did HTM across the whole country with stories. And then 2020, moving on in time, this was the webinar that Luis Fernandez and Jennifer DeFrancesco done. And of course, they are very important people in their own right. And we'll say more about Luis in a moment. And Jennifer went on as a clinical engineer, now manages several hospitals as a hospital administrator in the US using her background. And what they looked at is indicators in the context of hospital and department profiles, safety and program performance. That's the indicators, financial, program maturity, interoperability, and security. I mean, those issues were starting to come into the fore by 5 years ago. And let's switch over to the right for a moment. On the right-hand side, you see the GCEA and Amy's translation of CE-HTM benchmarking guide. Once again, over 100 indicators that were benchmarked in the US, but often used in other places around the world to measure how we're doing in our clinical engineering work. And we put those, as you know, so far into 5 languages on site and another 4 or 5 on their way. So we had Brazil think about, well, that's what they benchmark in the US, for example, and so that's what's in Portuguese. How does that relate to what we do in Brazil? So these indicator examples, benchmark examples, help people decide how they want to manage their inventories in a variety of ways. And then most recently, and I'll have more to say about it here, but where this came from, just in February, last month, Adriana Velasquez had led an effort over 5 or more years. I know she's been thinking about it 10 or more years. How do we have a common nomenclature for medical devices and health technology around the world that's so important so that we can all call the same things. And you know how that's landed. But here, one of her documents from past years was priority infusion devices for cancer management. And so it pointed to, of course, infusion devices and the application of supported drugs was a key way we manage cancer, particularly at the 2nd and 3rd levels of care. And So in the 2025 version, you know where that landed, that EMDN and GMDN were the winners. And I've got little slices of EMDN and GMDN in the middle bottom there about infusion pumps and what that says, you know, of what we call them and what's the definition of infusion devices now for nomenclature, so we can call it the same kind of infusion pump, the same kind of infusion pump around the world. And then that's now in the WHO medical device information system, MEDEVIS, and there's an example graphic over on the bottom left. So yeah, we've got a broader but more clear view of indicators now, the way they're viewed around the world. All right, so you know, I talked about this just happened. It was actually this report for WHO's executive board of the World Health Assembly was in January, but it was just approved in early February at the executive board meeting. And so now at the links provided, we have the desired and required asset standardization around the world that everybody recognizes. So this came out of, once again, Adriana's medical device unit, that you can go and find out more there. And this is an excerpt from that report. What are medical devices? Through an evidence-based assessment process, WHO recommends priority devices across all these clinical areas. They're continuously expanding as, you know, other health conditions get built in. Things are hosted in WHO Medical Device Clearinghouse, MEDEVIS, and it supports safety and coverage and emergency preparedness and quality and supply and regulatory for sustainable development. And all of that, you know, you can find out more here. But what are some other perspectives we bring to the whole table of indicators that help us improve clinical outcomes? And certainly those digital health tools that I talked about and many others talk about. And you can see them, cybersecurity and, you know, software updates, firmware updates, memory, and so on. But, you know, the things that have been emerging for a long time, but are becoming more and more important, are things like software as a medical device, Internet of Things. All of this fits, we know from our IT colleagues that we partner with, into the ITIL framework, IT infrastructure library. And so these are part of CMMSs. These are part of indicators. When, you know, we deploy devices, you know, we have to think about these standards and measure and see how we're doing with these elements. So I'm going to give 3 quick case studies, 2 of them from my own background and the colleagues I work with, clinical engineers in Kaiser Permanente, you know, a large health system, I think something like 14 million patients and 40 hospitals and so forth. But here was a medical device story that involved many manufacturers. It involved the device, the information from those devices being integrated into electronic health records, resulting in improved quality. In this case, you can see that I'm talking about what some people call integrated operating room systems, others call digital operating systems. You know, and we know that improving high definition scopes and so forth. So I've got how DOR and Kaiser Permanente and our EHR and PACS systems, picture archiving systems of all the images gathered in these surgeries were integrated together. So a surgeon, so how would a health system use this? That, for example, they would say, okay, I've got I'm going to use a digital operating room. I'm going to do the electronic health record and the scheduling system for the OR. I'm going to start the case. I'm going to gather images as the surgeon with his team goes through the case. I'm going to grab them into the electronic health record, so for review later and determination of what got seen and what's going to be done next. But as the clinical engineers were involved in this work, I'll just quickly say we had to make sure all the equipment and with all these different components were easy to use, that they had you know, kept up with the latest streaming video, and you know, people could look at it maybe from a distance or on their phones to see what was going on with these images, and images coming from many sources, C-arms, ultrasound, microscopes, and so forth. So we had to ensure image quality. We had to ensure storage and retrieval easily with all this regulatory safety and privacy. we had to make sure the video was reliable. And so I won't keep going about that, but like I said, we wanted to be able to send the results of all this, you know, to iPhones for surgeons to read and overread and so forth. So there were many ways that in this interaction that we had various kinds of indicators built into our system to manage digital operating rooms. And as you see, we had over 200, 10 years ago, we had over 200 of these in place in that health system. Another example is one manufacturer, but how we managed the tool, in this case, infusion pumps, the kind used in intensive care units and many other places. You know, on the right, there's the central brain of the infusion device, and then modules for different infusion flows for the patient's needs. So in Kaiser, in this time period, a while back, replaced a certain vendor that had a lot of recall issues with a large number of another vendor's large volume pumps for, as I was saying, inpatient hospital and clinic care. By the way, Kaiser had, like I said, 40 hospitals and 600 clinics. And so, and there, you know, what's the clinical engineering IT infrastructure look like on the bottom right? You can study that later. But what were we trying to do? When we used infusion devices, we wanted to be able to manage them in a variety of ways. Drug error reduction, a drug library was you know, deeply involved. How were we using those drugs? Were we using them correctly? And, you know, managing that, the quality of the infusions. But interestingly, as this vendor a few years back was putting this very capable, technically, device, was not ready yet for full wireless use for many reasons. And quality challenges there. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration alerts around design and software and firmware and infection control and preventive maintenance and over and under infusions and so forth. And then, as I mentioned, the wireless challenge, clinical engineering, working with clinicians, working with the manufacturer, working with how this integrates into electronic records, how this, and the last part was making sure there was appropriate safety so somebody couldn't tap into somebody's infusion pump in the ICU. All of those indicators had to come together to best manage that particular set of technology. And lastly, this is yesterday, our friends Luis Fernandez with his company Tink in Mexico using IoT, Internet of Things, to various hospital infrastructure projects. And here, asset management and clinical engineering and enterprise resource planning, the business side of hospitals, and digital health all come together. And one of the uses that Luis and his team offered to various hospitals in Mexico was combining and integrating the clinical engineering CMMS, the business side of the hospital's enterprise resource planning, and the IT side, the clinical and IT side, the health information system, HIS. And so what could he do with that integration and combination of different kinds of indicators? Is he could tell workforce results for an ICU, the cost of staff, who did what, when in the hospital, certainly all the patient information through the electronic health record we typically see it was flowing in from the ICU. We could tell from like the last example, what were the medications used and how were they used? What were the materials and services used? What was the medical equipment and the equipment maintenance issues? So once again, sort of a complex use of a variety of indicators. So lastly, as I close here, what's next? How does this apply to you, whether you're in an LMIC or in your first world health system? All of this is something you want to be a part of. And so this is a call to action for clinical engineers, biomedical engineers that serve at the point of care, health technology managers worldwide, and join Global Clinical Engineering Alliance as we build on this. And what do I mean by that? Well, AI, Dr. Ricardo Silva just gave a snapshot 2-3 weeks ago about the use of AI, including its use for indicators and CMMSs. So check that out. This link is active. In terms of Internet of Things, the example I just gave, Luis Fernandez, this was from a presentation he made in January of this year. to health leaders in Mexico, and we'll give you access to that. And think about this impact on CMMS from digital health quality and safety, including cyber, that I've talked about in my case studies. And, you know, how can CEs work with hospital and health system leaders? Well, GCEA has been very involved, in particularly last year and years before, with the International Hospital Federation. So that recognition I talked about at the beginning that we don't always get in these documents, about how to improve hospital performance, including clinical and business performance. Now maybe we have a pathway as a profession to get that through our International Hospital Federation colleagues. Check them out at that link. And lastly, and this is really cool, there are, you know, our brothers and sister colleagues around the world are doing some good things. Our friends in Canada have been have been setting standards of practice around CE-HTM indicators for several years. And then various clinical engineering departments in Canada have said to their national CE-BME society, which is CMBES, come in, send a team and come in and accredit our department. That'll give us greater local recognition and ensure we do all the things we say we do according to our national standards of practice. It'll give us better recognition in our country and our different parts of the country. And so, and in Canada, I'm sorry, in Brazil, AB CLIN, the National CE Society, has been, as CMBS has been doing department accreditation, peer review, they call it in Canada. In Brazil, they've been assisting another entity in that country doing independent service organization accreditation. So what GCEA, working with those two member organizations for us, CMBES and AB CLIN, is developing a global CE program accreditation process right now. And we're doing that through ISAQA. Many of you recognize that's the Global International Society of Quality in Healthcare. So we're collaborating with ISAQA to develop a global CE program accreditation process. So I hope all of this view of indicators, the current reality, gives you a view of different ways you can grow your CE department and its recognition around the world. So thank you for your time.